Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Uchiha clan's girls? Part 3. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Despite my dislike for Naruto's living situation with him having to live in a 2-room apartment on the eastern edge of the civilian district, I had to admit it made finding him that much easier for me. All I had to do was look for a lone Anbu member perched atop one of the abandoned warehouses, and by extension, I would find him. Using Kamui to peek through the metaphoric keyhole of its dimension, it took me less than a minute to succeed. The Anbu operative didn't even bother hiding, solely relying on a simple genjutsu altering the slope of the roof he was on, so that his crouched self comfortably fit under the fake roof. Even were I inclined to forgive him for the use of a genjutsu that any academy student in their 3rd year should be able to notice, I couldn't ignore the sheer hubris necessary to change the immediate vicinity of his charge's home, one that Naruto should know like the back of his hand, and think he would go unnoticed. This level of complacency should get him kicked out of Anbu immediately. On second thought, getting your charge abducted right under your nose might make that happen regardless. The next few days certainly wouldn't be enjoyable for him, and if I were a more agreeable person, I might have cared. As things stood, he should call himself lucky that he was wearing a Konoha headband, and I couldn't afford to alienate the village for now. I materialized behind the rain barrel on Naruto's apartment roof, out of sight from the vantage point of the Anbu operative. Lifting one of my samurai while bending my knee, I reached for a small pebble embedded in the sole and removed it. It took me merely an instant to weave a complex sound-triggered genjutsu on the pebble, before I tossed it in a wide arc over the rain barrel at the place where the Anbu was hiding. Straining my ears, I could hear the pebble land and then skitter to a halt. Only then I stepped out from behind my cover and briefly peeked in his direction to ensure that my genjutsu had taken hold. For the next few minutes, the genjutsu would block anything out of the ordinary from his perception. The best part of the jutsu was that instead of just making him ignore something as much less complex genjutsu were capable of doing by altering the target's behavior, this one actually forced the target's mind to overwrite the reality of what he perceived. As a result, his memories of that event were consistent with how he experienced it, preventing mind readers and the affected from recalling what actually occurred at a later time. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that the moment Naruto's absence would be discovered, this Anbu member would end up strapped to a table in T&I, with half a dozen Yamanaka trawling through his memories, trying to find the one responsible. Naturally, the objective was not to obfuscate who was responsible for his abduction. On the contrary, my plans required me to own up to the fact eventually. However, I needed to buy some time and direct the focus of attention onto Naruto's retrieval, rather than the sudden disappearance of the Uchiha clan, even though they would be hard-pressed to dismiss a connection between those two events out of hand. Nonetheless, my plan rested on the assumption that this would be enough to forestall the Uchiha clan being declared traitors to the village, with kill-on-sight orders issued for all of us, until I was finished and could present the village with a fait accompli. With a one-handed cartwheel on the ledge of Naruto's roof, I softly landed on his terrace beneath, directly in front of his glass door. It took a moment to straighten out my kimono and cheeking for any tears the fabric might have suffered, despite my best efforts to prevent it from being stained by keeping my legs together for most of the cartwheel. I was about to reach for the door handle when I caught a whiff of pepper. It immediately prompted me to freeze, and my mind went back to the conversation with my brother just a few hours ago, in which he had described my Naruto as a trap genius. It was hard to deny that he had made a good point when I nearly ran into one of them just now. Although, I had to admit I might be a bit rusty and hadn't been expecting any trouble at this stage of the mission. Even so, crafting a trap that nearly escaped my notice until it was too late was no easy feat. Far from it, in fact. Considering that I only noticed it because he had used a component with a strong smell within a faulty packaging spoke volumes in itself. For a moment, I pondered just using Kamui, making myself intangible, and stepping through the glass door, circumventing his traps, but where would be the fun in that? So, I took my time and inspected the door thoroughly. Two things stood out. A barely visible trail of a powdery substance on the upper doorframe, and 2 small bulges close to each other, one above the door handle and the other at the same height on the frame of the inwards opening door. My initial assumption placed what I assumed to be a pepper powder concoction on top of the doorframe. It was supposed to rain down on anyone crossing the threshold. I also suspected the bulge on the door was the result of something like an anchor to tie a rope around, whereas the bulge in the frame had to be a hook to guide the same rope through. In most cases, this meant the rope would be wound around the trigger of a beaked crossbow or something similar, just waiting for the moment the rope was pulled taut. It wasn't a bad trap. Simple, while still effective. Not in regards to killing an intruder, the pepper powder was an irritant at best if you allowed yourself to get covered in it. Some watery eyes and a runny nose were not suited to stop someone for good. Besides, the kunai or bolt released from a contraption was hardly anything a run-of-the-mill nin shouldn't have any problems evading. Still, I doubted that was even the intended goal. I found it far more likely it had been designed as an alarm system. The bolt or kunai being blocked or hitting glass or wood was hardly a silent affair, and pepper powder had the nasty habit of making people sneeze. The apparent way to avoid those traps by simply breaking the glass door would still end up serving the purpose of the trap by waking a sleeping Naruto, despite leaving the door untouched, with neither the rope being pulled nor the pepper powder falling on the intruder. The dispersal pattern from the thin trail of pepper powder I could make out on the doorframe suggested that he had placed some kind of container on the door, which was most likely leaning against the frame. I was confident that if I opened the door slowly that I would be able to locate the exact position of the container and attach a chakra string to it to keep it and its contents in place. That left only the rope and what was attached to it to disable. I figured that by opening the door a tiny crack, I should be able to squeeze a kunai in between and cut the rope before it went taut and could trigger the mechanism. Traps like this required a small margin of error so that they wouldn't be tripped accidentally via thermal expansion or the occasional vibration. Picking the lock with a senbon barely took a second. I then slowly opened the door, just far enough that I could identify exactly where the pepper powder was located. Just as predicted, there was a cylindrical container leaning against the doorframe. Mentally, I congratulated my Naruto for his choice of the container, because the round surface area would make any attempt to keep it in place with mundane means more difficult. Not so with a chakra string. Considering the fact that outside of Suna it was considered an obscure and mostly useless art, I could excuse this oversight. But the threat of the container spilling its contents over me contained, I redirected my attention to the door handle and the cord I found there, just as I had expected. Lacking a kunai, I formed a short chakra scalpel at the end of my finger and was about to cut when I noticed a nearly transparent ninja wire running alongside the cord. I might have missed it without possessing a Sharingan and the superior eyesight that came with it, even when not active. Curious, I closed the door a bit more as I watched the cord and wire intently. In response, the cord slackened, however, the wire stayed taut. Ingenious. There was something hanging off the wire. This meant that were I to cut it together with the cord, thereby disarming the mechanism attached to the cord, it would spring the wire mechanism. If I had to guess from what I had seen so far, it might be something as simple as a bell suspended in the air, from which if the wire were to be cut, whatever hung would fall to the floor, most likely in a noisy fashion. With a comprehensive understanding of what I was facing, I cut the cord and then proceeded, slowly opening the door until the pepper powder container above fit through the crack and could be guided safely into my right hand. By now, the door was far enough ajar that I could comfortably stick my left hand inside and close it around the wire. I cut it too. Holding the wire in place, I was finally able to open the door and I slipped inside. As it turned out, my assumptions about Naruto's traps were relatively spot on, with some minor deviations. Instead of a crossbow, the cord led to a taut slingshot attached to a trigger mechanism and the wire to a baby rattle. With narrowed eyes, I lowered the baby rattle painted with toad motifs to the floor. If that was all Jiraiya could bring himself to do for his godson, he had utterly failed my already low expectations of him and had just confirmed that it had been the right decision to lock him out of the Uzumaki compound. I allowed my gaze to wander, in part wary of an additional layer of traps and in part to get a comprehensive impression of his living conditions. To say I didn't like what I saw was an understatement, if there ever was one. I was downright furious that anyone would allow any child to live like that, and the fact that it was Naruto only made it worse. The supposed living room was nothing more than a garbage dump. There was no way to sugarcoat it, because that is what it was. Dirty laundry carelessly discarded was strewn about the entire floor. The small table in the middle of the room was stacked with dirty dishes, with food remnants still clinging to them in various stages of going stale. But the spread of spoiled food not limited to just the table, all manner of bugs were skittering around. It was a result of Kushina's sense of chaos turned up to 11, combined with a distinct lack of common sense only a child could have. Someone had obviously failed to teach him that leaving perishable goods lying around wasn't exactly conducive to his health. It took taking a tentative step into that mess for my nose to be assaulted by the abominable stink of all of this, which was magnitudes worse than any battlefield stained by blood and human excrement could ever hope to be. Crushing a cockroach beneath my thigh, it became balefully obvious that everything my brother said explicitly or merely implied turned out to be true. I knew that things had been bad for him, but I had never imagined he would have been left to his own devices to such a degree. This went far beyond the attempted conditioning he mentioned. What had the Hokage been thinking? I cut off my train of thought. There was no point in pondering that question, because it wouldn't matter after today. I wouldn't allow it to. Entering the bedroom, the situation didn't noticeably improve. The only difference was that the floor was mostly littered with clothes piled up in 3 large mounds, one in each corner of the room not occupied by a bed instead of old food. Sprawled on it with his blanket only covering one of his legs was my Naruto. His left hand was laying on his stomach within his partly undone kimono. Seeing him like this soundly asleep, his frizzly hair buried in his pillow, and a thin trail of saliva running down the corner of his mouth, the resemblance short of the color of his hair to Kushina was undeniable. I would have liked nothing better than to watch him sleep like this for hours, but I regrettably didn't have the time. I was just about to cross the small distance separating me from Naruto when my instincts were suddenly screaming at me. Having escaped the clutches of death more than once by listening to them, I didn't hesitate for an instant and immediately became intangible using Kamui. I had acted not a moment too late because a lightning-clad hand emerged from between the valleys of my breast, followed by the rest of a body. The uninterrupted momentum carried my attacker straight toward the wall next to Naruto's sleeping form, not offering any meaningful resistance. It simply shattered on contact with the jutsu held in my attacker's hand, leaving a huge hole in his wake. A heartbeat later, the sound of the impact mixed with what sounded like hundreds of chirping birds coming from behind reached me. Midair surrounded by dust and debris, my attacker twisted his body around so that his head hidden behind an animal mask ended up facing my way. He hit the ground on all fours, digging small trenches with his limbs into it as he skidded to a halt. By the time he looked back up from the glance he spared to make sure he hadn't screwed up his landing, he found Naruto's room empty of my presence as I had reappeared right behind him. This granted him barely enough time for the muscles in his neck to stiffen in alarm before the senbon between my fingers were plunged into them. To my astonishment, he somehow managed to start pushing his body off the ground and away from me before the poison took effect mid-motion and his legs gave out under him. He collapsed immediately thereafter with his face hitting the dirt, dislodging his mask in the process. Lying unmoving and staring up at me with a Sharingan in his left eye was none other than Hot Aki Kakashi. It was such a fortuitous encounter running into him here, saving me the trouble of having to hunt him down later on. Tilting my head, I kneeled next to him. I am glad you decided to return my clan's property of your own volition. His eyes widened in response to my words, but there was nothing he could do as my hand descended on his left eye and plucked it right out of its socket. I took a moment to carefully examine the eye for any damage its prolonged stay in a non-Uchiha body might have caused. It was only when I was satisfied with its pristine condition that I called forth my Susanoo and added it to my collection. Although I had expected Obito's left eye to be connected to his right eye's Kamui dimension in some fashion, the ability to open up a portal of varying size at range still came as a surprise. However, it by no means redeems your action concerning your treatment of Naruto, and there will be a price to pay for your neglect, I informed him while tagging him with a paralyzing seal. With Kakashi taken care of, I surveyed the damage he had just done. With just a cursory glance, I realized that my plan to abscond with Naruto without anyone noticing his absence for some time had just gone up in smoke. What's more, I had my suspicion that the use of that signature jutsu of his might have left some characteristic traces. Since I would ultimately have to own up to Naruto's abduction, I absolutely couldn't afford being suspected of any involvement in Kakashi's sudden disappearance. There was a marked difference between attacking your kin compared to attacking someone outside your clan, donning a Konoha headband. As a result, I was confronted with the question of what to do with him. I couldn't default to my first instinct to simply kill him and leave his body here to rot. Altering his memories was also not an option, considering I had no intention whatsoever of returning Obito's eye to him. So, regardless of what memory I decided to implant in his mind to explain the loss of his eye, suspicion would still fall upon me, not to mention that it might tip people off that someone was capable of altering memories. There was also a nagging question I desperately wanted an answer to. Why didn't he take care of Naruto? To obtain an answer, I would prefer being able to take my sweet time to find it by sifting through all of his memories, something that was best done in the relative peace of the Uzumaki compound, away from prying eyes. Moreover, chances were I wouldn't like what I would find in his memories and as a result would have to dispose of Kakashi. The particulars only mattered insofar as to determine how much pain I would inflict upon him before granting him the mercy of death. Then there was Naruto to consider. I would rather not have to alter his memories, and since Naruto had been watching the proceedings through the hole in the wall ever since my Susanoo disappeared, it was a warranted precaution. He shouldn't be confronted with death and the realities of life as shinobi for a few years yet. The less he knew, the better, especially if he shared Kushina's tendency to blab out secrets. Looking back, it had been a wonder her status as a Jinchuriki had never leaked out. Reaching into Kakashi's tool pouch, I retrieved an explosive note before I activated Kamui to make him disappear. It seemed my introduction would have to wait. I then stood up and looked right into Naruto's eyes. Casting a simple gain jutsu was all it took to put him to sleep. A moment later, I appeared next to him and caught his body as it was sliding to the floor. I carefully lifted Naruto up into my arms. I created another Kage Bunshin and handed over the explosive note to her. She would wait here until my other clone succeeded in bringing in the stragglers of the Uchiha police force and would then make sure to erase all traces of us ever being here. Given Kakashi's actions, nothing short of blowing up the hovel they had made Naruto live in would suffice. That would alert the village higher-ups to the disappearance of the Uchiha police force when not one of them showed up to investigate, despite the destruction of civilian property falling within their jurisdiction. It would definitely shorten the time I had at my disposal, which was why I didn't linger. With one last nod to my clone, Naruto and I were swallowed up by Kamui. We reappeared in the ritual room deep in the belly of the Uzumaki compound. I softly laid Naruto down near the first patch of the Uchiha prisoners littering the floor. To my delight, 2 of my clones were already present and had begun with the preparations of the room and the prisoners. The small children and the few elderly at their feet alluded to which of my clones they were. With one of my clones still in the process of drawing the life transfer seal in the center of the room, I decided to take advantage of the waiting time. First, I popped a soldier pill, undoubtedly not the last I would need to get through this night. The chakra expenditure of half a dozen Kage Bunshin for an extended period of time and the few small jutsu I had used up to this point were already taking their toll on my body. Age and relative inaction over the last few years were not doing me any favors either. Although, if those seals I took from Kushina's room worked as advertised, I just might be able to reach new previously thought impossible heights. While a warm sensation was spreading throughout my body as the soldier pill did its job, I went ahead and began securing Kakashi's limbs. Unlike my kinsman, I couldn't kill him just yet, regardless of the outcome of probing his mind. For one, I had to give his body the time to flush the poison out of his system. It was more than unlikely that anyone could tie the concoction back to me, but as one of the foremost poison experts in the village, I would end up a suspect regardless. This was especially true since my actions today would remind the village that I was still very much alive and more than a forgotten footnote in the annals of history. Kakashi, despite all his faults, was a resourceful shinobi, and it would be foolish to trust a paralyzing seal to keep a student of Minato Namikaze immobilized. There was also the problem of the decomposition of his body to consider. It would allow drawing an accurate conclusion of his time of death, and unfortunately, there were means to determine if a body had been put into stasis. For this very reason, I couldn't rely on sealing his body to obfuscate the time of his demise. Still, I was getting ahead of myself. First, I needed to see Kakashi's memories in order to determine the extent of his guilt. With Kakashi's hands and feet bound, I turned him onto his back and forced his remaining eye open. Kakashi's memories provided me with some very interesting events. From everything I learned, 2 things stood out to me. Kakashi joining Rude and the subsequent assassination attempt on the 3rd Hokage at Danzum's behest. In that instance, it wasn't the attempt that was unexpected, but that he had gotten away with it, as did the one who had given the order when both should have been executed. They weren't because Kakashi had changed his mind at the last minute and showed some remorse. This was a clear indication, if there ever was one, that the 3rd sentimental side was a weakness, and this was only the most recent instance in which enemies had managed to exploit it. Still, what had my blood boiling was learning that Danzum had held a Mokuton user within his ranks during the Kikbi attack. He had held the means to protect the village, to protect Kushina and Minato, and chose not to utilize them. It was because of him that Naruto had grown up an orphan. It was an unforgivable sin, one I would make sure he paid for in full. Yet as much as I would like nothing more than to march right into his lair and find ways to redefine the phrase torture to death with him as the guinea pig, a role he had more than just volunteered for with his actions, I couldn't. It was not right moment to do so, nor would it be for some time. It all came back to us needing to rely on Konoha for protection. I couldn't afford to weaken Konoha any further than I already had. Otherwise, it might invite attacks from the other major villages and put Naruto at risk. No, I had to bide my time and gather more strength for Naruto's sake. The first step towards that goal was to increase the quality of the members I had deemed had some future use for Naruto by promoting their eyes to the next level. I had wondered for years about the particulars of the Mangekyou Sharingan. Not much was known about the requirements for gaining a specific ability. Even reading the stone slab after gaining an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan hadn't provided me with a satisfying answer to the question. The absence of detailed records, most likely out of fear that they could be stolen and end up in the hands of our enemies, didn't help matters. My forefathers, if they had bothered at all, had been content with writing down the names of those who had managed to unlock their eyes. Over the years, a small number of people had achieved it. Contrary to popular belief, Madara had not been the first to do so, far from it, in fact. It really should not have come as a surprise, as it was impossible to constantly wage wars against other clans without someone here and there going through the preconditions of witnessing despair to awaken them, which I now knew to be an inaccurate transcription. Yet those who had, just like Madara, were infamous, reviled even by the Uchiha clan, and many had died at the hands of their kin, either slain for their crimes or their lost sanity, which had faded along with the light of their eyes, or both. The difference between them and Madara, who had irrefutably carved himself a place in history by founding Konoha together with Hashirama and Mito, was they could easily be extinguished from recorded memory and subsequently forgotten. Unless, of course, you knew where to look and happened to be the clan head's daughter. What I intended to find out was if there was some kind of underlying rule set, such that it would allow me to influence or outright affect which ability one would gain when their eyes awoke. What was it that determined it? Personality, blood, or something else entirely? Kakashi's memories provided me with the last piece of the puzzle to form a coherent theory. It was based upon two events, to be exact. Obito's presumed death witnessed by Kakashi made it clear that at the time his body had been crushed, my cousin hadn't had access to Kamui yet. It was absolutely inconceivable for any shinobi to hazard taking that kind of damage to their bodies if it could be avoided, and there was no doubt about it. His body was a mangled mess. Kakashi saw enough for me to be sure of it. The second event was the death of Rin. With the sole exception of what happened to Obito, it was the only other event providing the required level of despair to advance a Sharingan to its next stage. It was only a guess, but given the situation they found themselves in when Rin threw herself in the path of Kakashi's jutsu, Obito also might have been present, because I really had a hard time coming up with an explanation as to how Kakashi, after he had plunged his hand through her heart, could survive that encounter surrounded by enemies as he had been. Someone must have taken care of them mere moments after he had fainted from the shock of his actions. Disregarding teleportation, this meant that someone had to have been close by within sight of Kakashi and Rin in order to be able to interfere in time. If I factored in the state of the battlefield after he woke up with the whole Kiri platoon butchered to the last shinobi, their blood and intestines littering the area, it all looked more like the work of a savage beast than that of a skilled shinobi. The restraint and precision that came with proficiency at killing were conspicuously absent. Instead, I noted an undercurrent of unrestrained rage. The lack of variation or distinguishable patterns suggested a single perpetrator drunk on power great enough to casually overwhelm his opposition. It was exactly what I would expect the aftermath of cousin Obito enacting bloody vengeance on those responsible for the death of his beloved Rin to look like. The conclusion I drew from this was that the requirements for achieving a Mangekyou Sharingan with the ability of Kamui boiled down to the following. One set of Sharingan eyes had to be spatially separated, and both wearers needed to witness the death of the person they both cared about at the same time. It was possible the person had to die at the hand of one of them. This, in turn, meant that my running theory boiled down to the idea that the abilities granted by achieving a Mangekyou Sharingan were solely dependent on the specific triggering conditions. The small sample size wasn't conclusive, and as much as I would have liked to view the memories of both my father and my brother, the risk of falling under their sway wasn't worth it. This left putting that theory to practice, and as it happened, I had a whole clan of Sharingan-bearing shinobi lying at my feet. There was only one thing left to do before I could begin in earnest. I needed one last tool. Luckily I knew exactly where to get it. A short walk over the paralyzed bodies brought me to my destination, where Fugaku's bound body was lying on the ground. I momentarily paused, savoring the knowledge that the last thing he would ever see was me looking down on him. Bending down next to him, I plucked his eyes right out of his fear-stricken skull, thus sentencing him to spend his last moments in absolute darkness. I couldn't think of a more fitting punishment for someone who worshipped our eyes. Calling forth my Susanoo, one of its many limbs reached for Fugaku's eyes resting in the palm of my hand and inserted them into one of the countless empty eye slots it possessed across its body. The effects, just as they had been in the previous instances, were immediate, and I instinctively learned the basics of his Mangekyou Sharingan abilities Tsukiyomi and Amanamanakunashi. At the moment, I didn't care much for the latter and just acknowledged it being added to my repertoire. Tsukiyomi, on the other hand, was exactly the tool I needed. The jutsu able to trap the target after eye contact into an illusion of the user's design, powerful enough to make them experience days' worth of torture within a single moment, and able to inflict a tremendous amount of psychological damage to the recipient, putting them into a comatose state. It was next to impossible to escape the effects of Tsukiyomi because of the nearly instantaneous speed it worked at, rendering the usual methods to combat genjutsu useless. All these qualities made it one of the most powerful genjutsu in existence. However, I wasn't interested in the damage the jutsu could cause in a fight. I was far more interested in the limits of the illusions themselves, especially in regards to how convincing they could be made, because if I could manage to make them indistinguishable from reality, they then could be used to make the chosen ones of my kin go through their customized experiences of despair. Hopefully, this would allow me to trigger their Manjikam Sharingan. This would also allow me to test my theory about the same trigger conditions being responsible for the same powers. Conditions that in the case of recreating Kamui weren't easily met. There was no shortage of Sharingan allowing for plenty of transplants, but I only had one pair of people I could be reasonably sure had the same deep-rooted feelings for the same person. Unfortunately, those feelings were not of the romantic nature as I suspected was the case when it came to Obito and Kakashi's feelings for Rin, even though the latter was in denial about them. Kane and Aoi were identical twins. Their father had gotten himself killed a few years back shortly after the twins' birth, leaving their mother with the responsibility of raising them both on her own. He was one of the few fatalities we suffered outside war, which took a special kind of incompetence. Luckily, the children showed no signs of inheriting any of their father's less desirable traits. Their mother had been a relatively competent Takubetsu Jinin until her retirement following her husband's death. She was the only person the 4-year-old girls had any sort of close relationship with, so by creating an illusionary repeat of the event that led to Obito and Kakashi obtaining Kamui, they just might end up with the same eyes. Should the illusion fail to be convincing, in the worst case, I would have to make them reenacted in reality. It would be a waste of a perfectly healthy body, but at the end of the day, it would be worth it. I found the two girls one of my clones had stolen from their beds and deposited on the ground. Kane in her Gain Jutsu-induced sleep was still clutching her stuffed cat to her chest. They both looked the same since I last saw them, wearing their Uchiha black hair in mirrored asymmetrical lobes, with a bang running alongside their cheeks to help anyone who wasn't their mother tell them apart. I went down onto my knees and moved Kane's bang out of the way to allow me better, unimpeded access to her right eye. Using my left hand, I parted her eyelids, severed the optic nerve, and removed her eye. I then proceeded to Aoi and repeated the process of removing her right eye and began the arduous and time-consuming process of implanting the eye in my hand. It required the careful reconnection of every single strand of the eye's optic nerves to their corresponding counterparts. This was no easy task because a single mistake could have devastating effects on the eye's abilities. It was the first time my self-taught medical knowledge was actually put to use. I had originally started to dabble into it a few weeks ahead of Izumi's due date. Given the scar this left me with, I had intensified my efforts ever since. When I finally finished after half an hour, I repeated the process and subsequently implanted Aoi's right eye into a Kane. It would usually take at least a week until a medic would allow someone the use of a transplanted eye. The nerve strings, even with the help of Irem ninjutsu, were raw and brittle until they had the time to fully heal, and any premature use could hamper the healing process and increase the chances of an infection. This was an undeniable fact that wasn't helped by the anti-rejection medicamentation the recipients of transplants had to use for the rest of their lives. The medication was wholly unnecessary in their case with them being identical twins, and another reason why I chose them for the procedure, despite their admittedly young ages. Depending on the outcome of this experiment and the Manjikam Sharingan's abilities each eye would manifest, they might have to keep an eye on their sister. Even if my theory turned out to be correct, it was formulated upon the observations made regarding one pair of Sharingan split between two people and not two pairs as was the case with them. Regardless of the outcome of my experiment, I would rather avoid burdening them with medication that would weaken their immune systems, which might have an undeniable impact on their general health and endurance, amongst other things, preventing them from fully realizing their combat capabilities down the line. Even so, it would still leave them with two injured eyes, which shouldn't be strained in the foreseeable future to prevent damaging them. Raiding Kushina's room provided the perfect solution to this problem. A solution which, as the telltale sound of a Kage Bunshin dispelling and the memories that came along with informed me was ready to be used since the ceiling array was finished being drawn. Each of my hands reached around the twins' small hips and lifted them from the ground when I stood up on my way to the center of the room. I placed a Kane within the bounds of the recipient's circle of the ceiling array, while the currently last remaining clone of me present in the room unceremoniously threw down Fugaku into the donor one. I took a step back, moving well outside the bounds of the seal, holding onto Aoi, while my clone went for the control array of the seal. It was located between the two circular transfer endpoints and activated the seal by channeling some chakra through her feet into it. The array lit up and what looked like a yellow ethereal substance was making its way through the ceiling array on the ground from Fugaku's side to the twin. It showed a remarkable resemblance to blood traversing a vein. The difference was that instead of sustaining a body with oxygen, this one transported the life force from one side to the other. It took just a few moments of the seal running at a low setting for the effects to become notable. I watched with bated breath as in slow motion Fugaku's hale and hardy body turned feeble. His hair turned white and the few small wrinkles on his face multiplied and became deep gouges littering his face as the life was literally sucked out of him. He more and more resembled a raisin than a grape. On the other side, the effects weren't as pronounced. From where I was standing, all I could tell was that Akane had gained an increasingly healthy complexion. I would have to wait for this to be over before I could do a thorough examination of the twin to say more, but it seemed the seal was working as advertised. I turned my attention back to Fugaku, not wanting to miss a single second of his demise. He ultimately didn't last long, and if not for my Sharingan burning every gruesome detail to my memory, I would have been vexed at how fast it was, not giving me the time to truly savor the process. My clone went to the lifeless husk that had once been the man I had been forced to marry and sealed it away. The clone replaced it with a female roughly the same age as Fugaku and removed her eyes with surgical precision. Meanwhile, I switched out Akane with her sister and we started the process again. Mere moments later, we had a second body that was also sealed away and had to be disposed of later, just like Fugaku and the many others who would follow him into death. I would probably resort to the use of fire not because it was tradition for the clan to burn or dead, I couldn't care less about that, but the tinge of poetic justice it invoked was a different matter. Burning the old and decrepit and building something new nurtured by the fertile ground provided by the dispensed ash of their bones seemed like a fitting end to my father's legacy in more than one sense. Crouching down next to the twins, I took stock of their condition. The diagnostic scan of their bodies not only told me that their implanted eyes were fully incorporated and ready to be used, but that there were other changes. At first glance, they might seem inconsequential. Improved blood circulation throughout their bodies, an increase in red blood cells and muscle fiber density, and bone hardness. For now, those changes were small, their bodies facilitating them by burning through their stored resources. I could only assume that those changes wouldn't be fully finished for another few weeks, depending on their food intake during that time frame. It was truly astonishing. Seeing these effects, it became clear that the prolonged life expectancy was only a side effect of an overall improvement of the recipient's bodily health. This would undoubtedly be reflected in their overall combat power, since those changes would ultimately help boost their endurance, speed, and chakra. It was more than I could have hoped for and made me wish for the first time in my life that my clan was bigger than it currently was, with more bodies to spare. My musings were interrupted when another of my clones appeared via Kamui inside the room and deposited another batch of people and a scroll containing the assets of the raided homes on the ground before dispelling immediately afterward. This was the last of my clones to successfully return from collecting clan members from their homes. Only those in the Uchiha police station and the one I left behind to blow up Naruto's living accommodations had yet to accomplish their tasks. Stimulating the eyelids of the twins with a bit of chakra ensured that they would stay open for the next few minutes, even in their unconscious state. With the final step of my preparations done, all that was left was figuring out if Tsukiyomi was up to the task. The vast experience in using genjutsu and manipulating memories I had accumulated helped a great deal in crafting the illusion. The first part of the illusion was a short fight against a faster opponent, relying on barrages of countless enban projectiles that were notoriously hard to make out, thereby straining their eyes while also putting them under emotional pressure with their sibling present and in need of protection, did the trick of awakening the Sharingan in both of them. Designing a scenario to awaken the Sharingan was simple enough if you had no regard for the child's well-being. It had been a common practice back in clan-era days for parents to force the issue. The clan had numerous instructional guides regarding the topic stashed away. Each method seemingly tried to outdo the other in cruelty that could be inflicted upon the children with varying success rates. It was the second part of the illusion I was anxious about. I kept the details mostly the same as what Kakashi could remember from the encounter. I only replaced Rin with the twins' mother and then put them both into the illusion. I was careful to ensure that they then went through the events concurrently, just from different points of view. Akane was the one to accidentally kill her mother with a kunai, while her sister Aoi observed it from nearby. The whole proceeding didn't even take a second. The very instant I cast Tsukiyomi, it was already over, both of the twins' eyes advancing to Manjikam Sharingan state. The appearance of all four of them was identical to the pinwheel pattern of Obito's eyes. The activation and subsequent advancement took a lot out of both of them, leaving their bodies at the very brink of exhaustion and severely depleting their chakra. It was difficult to imagine how they would have fared before they had received Fugaku's life force, strengthening their own. It didn't bode well for the other younger girls, but that was a consideration for later. At present I was more interested in learning more about their eyes. Diving into their memories and listening to the exact moment their eyes advanced and whispered to their subconscious what they are capable of confirmed my theory. In addition, it became apparent with their eyes not only possessing the same ability as Obito's, but also possessing the same distinguished pinwheel pattern that those two things went hand in hand and were solely dependent on the triggering conditions. This allowed someone familiar with all possible permutations to be fully aware of what they were facing with just a glance at the eyes. Unless, of course, that glance turned out to be a fatal mistake. Even Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan wouldn't be exempt from this phenomenon, since their pattern was a simple fusion of the two respective Mangekyou Sharingan patterns making it up. There was another interesting tidbit of information I gleaned from this. Both the twins manifested only one ability each. Akane got the ranged Kamui attack in her original left and the implanted right eye. Her sister got the intangibility touch version of Kamui in her original left and the implanted right eye, and neither could manifest a Susanoo, which I assumed could only be done with eyes belonging together. In order to prove or disprove that theory, which should help deepen my understanding of our bloodline, the twins needed their original eyes back. The process of carefully removing and retransplanting them barely took me a minute. As a result, each of the twins once again ended up with one eye that was in no condition to be used. Luckily, I knew how to solve that problem, and so did my clone, who correctly deduced what I was planning and, anticipating my needs, had prepared another two of my male kin. The only use any of them had in the Uchiha clan I envisioned subordinate to my Naruto laid in their eyes and the life force they could offer to strengthen those worthy. I would strip them of both until nothing remained. After my clone placed the first body stripped of his eyes into the sealing array, I activated it. The effects it had on the donor were exactly the same as Fugaku and the woman suffered before. His shriveling to a lifeless husk within mere moments. The effects on the twins compared to the first time were negligible. Their bodies visibly recovered from what I had put them through, but this time there was no immediate change in their complexion. It wasn't unexpected. There had to be a limit to the amount this seal could help a recipient already in peak physical condition. When the array shut down with the death of the donor, I went to both of them and conducted another examination of their bodies. As it turned out, receiving a second dose of life force expanded upon the changes from the first, increasing most bodily functions even further. This confirmed that the sealing effect was indeed cumulative. Unfortunately, I had no way to tell what impact the ritual had on the twins' life expectancy. It might have added 10, 20, 30, or even more years to their lives, or in the best case might have added the donor's entire lifespan as advertised. It was unlikely I would ever be given the opportunity to find out for sure, because not would I have to outlive them, but also given the danger of our profession, neither of us dying a violent death at some point was an unrealistic expectation. The only thing I could say with any certainty was that it most definitely wouldn't shorten it, and it gave them an edge, which was a more than sufficient reward for a resource that I would otherwise be squandered, since I would have killed them all anyway. But that question answered, I turned my attention back to the twins and once more dived into their memories, looking for another whisper. It took me a while to find it, as it was quieter and buried deeper than when their eyes had first advanced, even more so than whenever a Mangekyou Sharingan gets added to my collection, but it was unmistakably there. Once again, I was proven right, and each of the twins was now equipped with a pair of Mangekyou Sharingan, able to perform both Kamui Jutsu and the ability to conjure Susanoo, the latter being a necessary requirement in order to gain an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. No matter how powerful Kamui was, it wasn't worth being stuck with eyes that would eventually lose their light. The conundrum was how to proceed from here. I was reluctant to advance their Mangekyou Sharingan to Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan using someone else's Mangekyou Sharingan, despite the abundance of people with Sharingan all around me whose eyes could be put toward that purpose. Something was stopping me. It wasn't the time it would take me to achieve it that was the problem, since I wasn't under any time constraints. At best, it was a soft one rather than a hard one, since it would politically hurt me to delay owning up to my deeds, and it would make negotiations about the clan's future more difficult. Other than that and the added risk of someone escaping, either through an ability advancing their eyes might grant them, or during one of the breaks I inadvertently would have to take to do so for the over 500 members of the clan, there was no logical reason not to do it. All I had was a gut feeling. No, it was more than that. Ever since I had implanted Naruto's eyes into my Susanoo, there had been a connection between us. It was faint, and without all the other eyes as a comparison, it was doubtful I would have been able to tell it was even there, to begin with. Still, for there to be some kind of link made sense. As Obito's case had made clear, a pair of Sharingan remained connected to each other, even if spatially separate. So it stood to reason that since his regeneration made sure he wasn't limited to just one pair of eyes throughout his life, that all his eyes were connected. His eyes were special, just like he was. I had known that from the moment I had first laid my eyes upon them. The raw power they had emanated had been beyond even my late father's eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. It was hard to imagine what they would be like should they ever evolve. So I was more than just confident they would more than suffice to preserve the twins' light, even though it would come at the price of their eyes, not gaining any additional abilities, instead of the possible 5 jutsu remaining at just the current 3. Then again, it was 3 extremely powerful jutsu. Most if not all of them would never have unlocked them, if not for me, and perhaps something would come of this. Well, I had to admit the chances were slim that the twins would somehow benefit from this in the future beyond not going blind. The same couldn't be said about Naruto. After all, there were some undeniable similarities to the triggering condition of Kamui. In the grand scheme of things, if limiting all their eyes to just 3 Mangekyou Sharingan abilities instead of the possible 5 held the potential, regardless of how slim, that Naruto would profit from this in some way, I would always consider it a price more than worth paying and would gladly do so 1,000 times over. My mind made up, I ventured over to a sleeping Naruto. After steeling myself, I began the grueling task with the help of my clone of harvesting his eyes. By the time I had collected both of his eyes and had handed them to my clone, one of his eyes had already fully regenerated, allowing me to extract the second pair without any downtime. I didn't linger next to him for long and only allowed myself to briefly caress his cheek, fearing that if I did, I wouldn't have the heart to do this over and over again until all of the chosen were seated with his eyes. Both my clone and I returned to back the twins with our respective bounties. Carefully prying open one of the twins' eyes each with my index and middle finger, I used Amanamanakunashi in them both. Their eyes immediately became milky, and their pupil was overlaid with a shadowy resemblance of the Mangekyou Sharingan pinwheel the jutsu originated from, displaying its use for everyone to see. Unlike Kotomasakami, the jutsu didn't subtly manipulate the target's mind and instead suppressed most of the conscious mind, thereby turning them into nothing more than puppets whose strings were held by the user of the jutsu. They were forced to obey every command given to them. It really shined when it came to combat applications. Being able to hijack an opponent's body with a glance was nothing to scoff at. Even though the jutsu could be dispelled, it was easier said than done. After all, there was a huge difference between disrupting the chakra of a willing ally and that of an enemy, especially if that enemy had access to nearly their full range of abilities and was constantly hurling jutsu at you. The added disregard the hijacked had for their own bodies only added to the danger. That it was most likely this jutsu which was ultimately responsible for the Kikbi attack was only of academic interest at this point, because by the time the day was over, nobody with access to the jutsu or the potential to awaken it would be in any state to threaten Naruto ever again. At least it appeared that way, because with this, I had added the eyes of 2 of the 3 known users of the jutsu to my collection, and Madara had been dead for decades. Still, there was some lingering doubt. I had only been able to retrieve one usable eye from cousin Obito, with the other one closed from what I assumed was the use of Izanagi, the eye which had to be the one to cast Amanamanakunashi on the Kikbi, because his other eye was only able to use Kamui. Not that it stopped me from implanting it into my Susanoo in the hopes of getting something out of it, which to this day hadn't happened, and after nearly 8 years of nothing, I doubted that would ever change. Nevertheless, with Obito's other eye having been gifted to Kakashi, it begged the question as to where he got his second eye from and what happened to its counterpart. Quite a shame, since it prevented me from finding out who it originally belonged to. Minato must have really done a number on him if he was forced to rely on that jutsu to sacrifice what at the very least must have been a Mangekyou Sharingan and still lost. Still, Fugaku, the only other wielder I knew of, was no longer an issue. But control over their bodies, I forced them to summon the first stage of their Susanoo and directed the chakra construct to implant a pair of Naruto's eyes into the empty eye sockets each. The whole process barely took a full minute, but when I relinquished my control over their bodies, they conked out and their small bodies trembled uncontrollably. I didn't even have to examine them to identify the symptoms of acute chakra exhaustion. My clone didn't waste time and went to prepare another few bodies to relieve their suffering. I, however, just stood there replaying the exact moment they reached the eternal Mangekyou Sharingan in my mind. The glimpse I caught in their eyes was not something that should have happened. From my research over the years poring over old dusty scrolls, I knew that when 2 Mangekyou Sharingan were combined to create an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, their respective patterns merged into a new one signifying their evolution. They didn't talk about the 3 pinwheels, the tomo of the Sharingan turned into multiplying into 6 and then 3 of them spinning until they overlaid the 3 original arms and became one. I would have expected to see a 6-armed pinwheel Sharingan if I had given the eyes of one of the twins to the other in order to create one pair of eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, but that was not what happened, and even if it had, it wouldn't have explained the subsequent merger. I waited with bated breath for another transfer of life force into Aoi to be over and Akane's turn before I began my investigation. Diving into their minds, I nearly missed it. Only the thought of what the eternal Mangekyou would have turned out to be had the twins' eyes been combined lingering in my mind allowed me to notice the subtle differences in the whispers of their eyes. They didn't tell of any additional jutsu they were now capable of, but they did mirror each other's capabilities. This meant that both of their eyes were able to utilize each of the 2 Kamui jutsu Naruto's eyes, creating the exact same result I would have gotten had I combined both the twins' eyes into one. Suddenly, using his eyes didn't seem like such a bad idea. Sure, it was still a reduction in options open to the wielder, with only having 3 instead of 5 jutsu. Still, considering that losing an eye, which was a real possibility in a battle, would reduce 5 to 2 and 3 to 2, made the trade-off seem was a wantonly underestimated concept. I reached for the scrolls I had taken from Kushina's study and unsealed their contents, and two cylindrical objects appeared. I picked up the first one and imprinted it with my blood. Object in hand, I went over to Naruto. A small incision on his thumb provided me with a few drops of blood, which I used to imprint him as the second user of the tool supposed to apply the seal to our eyes. The rest of the blood I applied to the stamp carrying the seal to ensure that only his seed would ever take hold in the womb of any Uchiha woman. For the finishing touches, I applied both seals to safeguard our bloodline to the twins. After one final examination of their bodies in which I found no cause for concern regarding the seals, I used the first tool while looking up and applied it to both my eyes. Then I unwound my kimono to get access to my stomach and applied the second seal on top of my navel. Unlike the seal to my eye, this time I felt something. A warmth spreading throughout my lower torso that grew increasingly unpleasant. It was as if my insides had been lit on fire, curling up in the fetal position because of the pain. I couldn't stop cursing myself for my utter stupidity, overlooking the fact that I had given birth, and despite my virginity technically intact, I was not untainted. Of course, a seal from a patriarchal society that treated women as nothing more than cattle would take issue with that. Just before the pain grew unbearable and I thought I might die, the pain stopped and the heat in my guts disappeared as suddenly as it had begun. Righting myself, I grudgingly acknowledged that I had been lucky. This mistake could have cost me and Naruto everything. As the sole person standing between him and the village, I had to do better. I owed that to him and his parents. This realization made me reconsider messing with the last seal from Kushina's room before I had the chance to completely look it over. But that taken care of, the only thing left was ensuring their unquestionable loyalty to Naruto. Given that every clan indoctrinated their children to various degrees, it wouldn't take much to achieve that. A few minor tweaks to their memories here and there would suffice. Some added narrative painting Fugaku and the elders in a bad light trying to usurp me would answer the question of why they had needed to die and we had aligned ourselves with Naruto. I also erased the unsavory memories of what I had put them through. Under normal circumstances, this would be as far as I would go, but this was not about my sensibilities. This was about Naruto's safety, and for that, there was nothing I wouldn't do, no line I wouldn't cross. This was why I tapped into Kotomatsukami. Unlike my late father, I wasn't content with relying on some badly worded suggestion to force their compliance. Loopholes and unforeseen circumstances conflicting with the orders given were just too much of a risk. Instead, I chose to go with what my father should have used on me, even though I was glad that he hadn't and made the twins love Naruto with everything they had. This was not entirely without danger either. Obsession had the potential to become a problem on its own. For that reason, I went to great lengths and curbed their capacity for feelings like jealousy as much as reasonable, and added loyalty towards the clan, and especially towards Naruto in equal measure. This should prevent any unforeseen accidents, and since I had every intention to monitor those changes and adjust what I did to each individual girl as needed, I didn't expect any real problems to occur. Wiping away the sweat on my brow, I let my eyes wander around the room. 50 more to go, meaning another 50 more Tsukuyomi to trigger their eyes, another 50 more Amanama to call forth their eyes, another 50 more uses of Kotomatsukami, Amenatakatachi, and Kamimisubi to alter their minds. I had a long and exhausting night ahead of me. I was reluctant to do the same to the youngest children. The strain of a Susanoo forcefully conjured would likely be enough to potentially harm them permanently, if not outright kill them. Even in the best case scenario, I expected a severe case of chakra exhaustion, and as a result of that for them to fall into comas. Their chakra networks and tenketsu were just not mature enough to sustain such a highly demanding jutsu. Their death should they occur would be a heavy hit given what I had planned. My plans made every single girl a valuable and rare resource, and squandering them lightly was the last thing on my mind. Nonetheless, it couldn't be helped. I had to do this now, fully aware of the risks. With our clan strength diminished, we found ourselves in a very perilous position. Fugaku and the elders were known traitors to the Hokage at minimum. This could mean that rather than allowing me an associate of theirs to stay in charge, they might decide to simply dispose of me and start over themselves and rebuild the Uchiha clan how they saw fit. This was a possibility I couldn't simply discount, but it was a course of action I was certain I could dissuade them from even considering by placing as many hurdles as possible in their way, to the point that dealing with me would be far less of a headache for them. Among other things, it meant not a single Uchiha would have unprotected eyes, ensuring that no one besides those born with them could ever make use of them. This alone would go a long way toward making us a less tempting target for their machinations. This was especially true since a woman or girl used as a breeding stock had no need for eyes, which made protecting our eyes a valid concern. Dan's, in particular, struck me as someone who wouldn't be above such methods if they furthered his goals. Then there was the fact that leaving the girls with just a Mangekyou Sharingan heavily limited the use of their eyes throughout their lifetimes, and sentencing them to a slow descent into blindness was something that left a bad taste in my mouth. The existence of a key to the seals protecting our eyes meant that it could easily be fixed at a later date, allowing me to unlock Naruto's or anyone else's eyes, should the need arise for some intact eyes to advance a Mangekyou Sharingan to an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. So the logical thing would have been to postpone the procedure until they were older and their bodies were able to take the strain. The problem was that I had noticed when I had gained Obito's eye, and later my father's, that the hold Kodomatsu Kami had over me slipped ever so slightly in response to the power of their eyes being added to my own. Given the power held within Naruto's eyes, there was a chance that by advancing their Mangekyou Sharingan to an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, that the sudden boost to their power might weaken or remove the adjustments I had made to their minds and memories. It was a risk I simply couldn't take. My hold on them needed to be absolute. Otherwise, they could become a potential threat to my Naruto. Hopefully, by strengthening the younger girls beforehand by transferring the life force of one or two people, the worst might be avoided. The Uchiha clan as of yesterday had 598 members, minus my father and brother we were left with 596. Yet only 56 including myself were of any future use to my Naruto. That left me with 540 spare bodies. If I fed the life force of 7 others to each of my 56, that would leave me with 148. It would probably be prudent to give the more talented members like Izumi and Shigeru a few more to strengthen them further, perhaps even to Satsuki. She was in Naruto's class, and if I couldn't pry him out of the academy, she would be all the protection he had for most of the day. Given her mediocre talent, she would need all the help she could get to not slow him down. So, if I gave those 3 an additional 3, that left another 39 for me, and the rest I would use on Naruto. It should more than make up for what I would have put him through by the end of the night by extracting 56 pairs of eyes from him. Just imagining what heights this might allow him to reach had me lick my lips with excitement. It had taken me the entire night and half a dozen soldier pills interspersed with absorbing the life force of my kin, but I had managed to awaken the Mangekyou Sharingan in every female maiden of the clan, even though it had been touch and go for some of them. The young, underdeveloped bodies had borne considerable trouble standing up to the stresses the procedure put them through, despite the precautions I had taken. The need to call forth their Susanoo so that I could use Naruto's eyes to advance their eyes to the eternal state had been especially taxing. Regardless, in the end, it had been worth it because now there were 55 young female Uchiha maidens, every single one of them wielding the power of an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. Even though they still had a long way to go, they were already a force to be reckoned with. I had done everything in my power to ensure they were loyal, obedient, and above all, deeply in love with one Uzumaki Naruto. Every single one of them would happily die for him if the need would ever arise, or if he ordered them to, just as it should be. I had also managed to make some sense of the 2 other seals I had taken from Kushina's room. The life transfer seal Uchiha used on prisoners was straightforward. It had been designed with more than one guard having the control seal of several prisoners in mind. So, all I had to do was apply the prisoner seals to the girls, while Naruto and I received a control seal. Thus, if required, we could kill each of them with a simple hand seal and a bit of chakra, or they would die if anyone triggered one of the failsafes I added. What I came to call the locator seal was a bit more tricky. It had been designed for a parent to find their wayward child. The scroll came with only 2 variants. One allowed more than one seal on children to be keyed to the parent seal, and another variant allowed to key one child seal to 2 parent ones. Neither was what I was truly after. I wanted a seal that would allow us to locate each other. The basic concept and building blocks were there, but getting them to work the way I wanted had taken all the knowledge I had about seals, a lot of trial and error, and half the night of working in tandem with 2 Kage Bunshin to get it right. Those 2 and the one safeguarding our eyes were the only ones I had dared to put on my Naruto. I would have loved nothing more than to add to my little Naruto's protection. However, applying seals on someone, especially someone who already had a seal deeply entwined with their chakra network, like all Bij-containing seals were by their very nature, was a very delicate and extremely dangerous process. The things that could go wrong were just too numerous to count. I also knew that the seals I put on him wouldn't be a lasting protection for his eyes, because once they were removed, the seal was gone, and his newly regenerated eye was without protection from that moment onward. Still, the seal's existence without knowledge of his healing factor should still be a viable deterrent, and even the most determined might not try again after it failed once, at least if they had to fight for it. I dismissed that thought before it could go anywhere, just in time for the massive double doors leading to the council chambers to come into view. Dressed for the occasion, I walked right into the meeting past the Chunin guarding the door. My battle attire consisted of a long-sleeved form-fitting black kipao dress. The hem reaching past my knees was slit at the sides and tapered off so as not to hinder leg movement. Beneath it, I wore long-legged pants. Above it, I wore my customized flak jacket, jet black without pockets and held in place by 2 shoulder straps. The last time I had been in this room had been at my father's heels. It had been more about presenting myself to the other clans than for me to learn how to lead a clan. I had been told not to even think about speaking during the meeting, only to sit there and look pretty as it was expected of me. Back then, no one had so much as paid me more attention than a curious glance. The contrast to today couldn't be more extreme. All eyes were on me although not openly staring, which would have been unbecoming while still managing to always keep me in their field of vision. Some even possessed the audacity to allow their hands to hover over their weapon pouches. I only hoped the last half hour spent before a mirror would stand up to scrutiny and conceal the rejuvenating side effects the life transfer seal had imposed upon my body. Under normal circumstances, this would be a cause for celebration. The few marks I had accumulated over the years marring my body had disappeared without a trace. This would have been a welcome change to any woman self-conscious about her looks. It had been especially gratifying losing the scar from the first C-section one performed on myself, with my lackluster understanding of Ireme Jutsu at that time, as it had been a constant reminder of having carried Fugaku's children to term. In a shinobi village, time was one of the enemies we'd yet to find means to defeat. De-aging me to my very early 20s was not something that could easily be explained, nor did I have the slightest inclination to do so. Fortunately, I had paid particularly close attention to the Mandaty-Anbu classes regarding disguises not requiring using chakra. It was overall a safer method than relying on a simple henge, a jutsu known to fail the most superficial inspections. It also helped matters that it had been years since I had met any of them face to face, so it was more than likely that any discrepancy they might notice would be attributed to me aging gracefully. Ignoring their evident enmity, I walked to the chair reserved for the Uchiha clan leader at one of the ends of the 3/4 circle table and seated myself. No one dared to protest. My eyes lingered for a moment on the Uzumaki seat next to the Senju seat right across from me at the other end of the table, which had been vacant far too long. Mito had been the last person to sit in it. According to the stories, she had never so much as spoken a single word, let alone voted in those sessions, remaining impartial, only silently observing. Kushina had never had any interest in governing, never even participating a single time. It had never seemed to occur to her that Hokage was for the most part an administrative position. She wasn't the only one with a seat to never show her face. It was a behavior shared by many, such as the Hot Aki clan, for one. People had been joking for years that they should stop sending him invitations, because even if he were to choose to attend, he would arrive only after the meeting was concluded, not that he was in a position to do so any longer. I took a glance at the people present. The first thing I noticed was they hadn't changed much. Besides some deepening wrinkles, most looked precisely the same as when I had last seen them. Sume remained true to her animalistic nature. Her untamed spiky brown hair was as much an indication as her long nails and sharp teeth. She completed her looks with the Inuzuka clan's traditional fang markings on her cheeks. Itachi kept his ash blonde hair so long that it reached his lower back. His green eyes and well-defined jawline made him appear like a discount Minato. It was no wonder prim and proper Akina had settled for him after Minato had rebuffed her advances. She probably had no idea how lucky she had been that it had not been Kushina to break her heart, which would have been just one thing among many she would have shattered for someone making moon eyes at him. The less said about Akimichi Chimza, the better. The Redeed had somehow managed to become even more plump, begging the question as to whether the samurai armor he squeezed himself into was a new one, or if it had been reworked. I would fear for his wife if she did not fill out her clothes just as well as he did. Out of the three that made up the original Ino Shikasho, only Shikaku looked different. The two scars diagonally marring his face were a new addition. Knowing Yoshino, she would have given him hell for this brush with death. She had always been self-conscious about her husband's looks, always lamenting the fact that he had not been more handsome. Long black hair and milky white eyes and an expressionless face that said "I am better than you" unmistakably belonged to Heike Hiashi, the last from our vaunted generation of clan heads. He was the other one besides Chimza who forwent wearing a slightly modified Konoha standard uniform along with a flak jacket. Instead, he wore loose-fitting long-sleeved robes beneath his brown haori. There was a murmur going through those gathered in the room when the Hokage entered, flanked by two masked and cloaked Anbu members. Hidden beneath a small stature, the traditional white haori, a red hat and kimono, and an aged and wrinkled face, was one of the most deadly individuals in the village. He failed in hiding a minuscule break in his stride and a slight widening of his eyes when he noticed my presence. Trying his best to appear unbothered, he took his seat behind a small table that was prominently located in the empty space left by the missing part of the 3/4 circle table the rest of us were sitting at. He sat still for a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, going by the increased fidgeting as they waited for him to start the meeting. I greet all those gathered here. Let us start with discussing what I assume most of you are dying to know. It was a poor choice of words as far as I was concerned. On the other hand, as all eyes fell on me, the assembled clan leaders gave up all pretense of hiding their stares. Mikoto-san, would you care to enlighten us as to what happened last night in the Uchiha compound and where your clansmen disappeared off to? And while we are at it, his tone suddenly lost his grandfatherly gentleness, leaving a dangerous edge. I would like to know the whereabouts of one Uzumaki Naruto. Despite his words framing it as a request, his tone left no doubt that it was anything but. It was an order, one that carried the very real threat of consequences for non-compliance. Left unspoken was that Naruto, the village's precious weapon, had better be unhurt. It was hard not to outright laugh in his face at this fake concern about my Naruto and to tell him exactly what I thought of him and the ones responsible for his treatment. I would have liked nothing more than to grab Naruto and the few survivors from my clan and leave this cesspit behind to give my Naruto a chance at a life away from all this. Unfortunately, I was painfully aware of the sheer impossibility of such an endeavor succeeding. While it would have been easy using Kamui to flee the village, the problems would have only started from there. They would never allow the Uchiha clan to break their allegiance to Konoha, despite the Konoha Charter explicitly allowing for it. With the secrets we harbored, the fear of our potential, that our bloodline could be added to strengthen another village, we were simply too much of a threat. Then there was also the hidden reputation to consider if two of the three founding clans were to wash their hands of Konoha. Shimura Dansme especially would never stop hunting us for that perceived slight alone. He was also present. A former acquaintance and friend of my late father. Although that might be a step too far since I doubted either one of them did friends. Despite his stoic face, the utter disdain in his eyes as he visually tried to dissect me was hard to miss. Not that he was capable of anything more substantial than glaring with his body in this broken state. One-eyed, one-armed, and requiring a cane to walk, the old man with the X-shaped scar on his chin would have trouble surviving a single bout with anyone present. The danger lurks in the Anbu faction called Root under his control and the free rein he was given to utilize them to the best of Konoha's interest. There were numerous rumors back when I was in Anbu about what the people under his command got up to. Some I managed to confirm after the fact. He was not one to be trifled with. Given the current strength of the clan, after I had separated the chaff from the seeds that might eventually grow into wheat, the outcome was never in question. I could not hope to protect them by myself, since it wouldn't be just Konoha that would come looking for us. The moment word spread, no village would leave a stone unturned to secure our services. Willing or unwilling wouldn't matter, and that was without taking Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki into account. He was still a malleable young boy. Even if they were to fail to put him into whatever mold they saw fit to put him into, he had other uses beyond that. Some enemies might be satisfied with denying Konoha a military asset, ensuring their Jinchuriki would be unopposed in future confrontations with Konoha. I would be more interested in ending the Namikaze line than anything else. Then there was Kumo. From Naruto's status as the jailer of a Bij clone, they would infer him being the carrier of at least one bloodline, one that was nearly extinct. They wouldn't hesitate a moment to put him into some kind of breeding program. Should anyone ever learn about his Sharingan and the fact that he could create a near-endless supply of them, there was no doubt in my mind that wars would be fought over him. This meant the only way forward was to accumulate power. To raise the Uchiha clan to what it should have always been, to deter anyone from sending a wrong look my Naruto's way. The problem was that building up that power was something that took time. Therefore it was in our best interest to stay under the protective umbrella of the village, for the time being. Once we had replenished our strength, we would have options. By then, it would be for Naruto to determine what to do with it. For now, I had to play the part of the loyal Konoha shinobi, biding our time. I curtly responded. The Hokage was taken aback. "Excuse me," he said, trying to make sense of my words. "The particulars of last night's events are of no concern to you," I clarified. "Preposterous," Tori Nezumi loudly proclaimed. "The Hokage gave you an order, and you would do well to comply with it." He was the only other person besides Hikahiyashi, not counting the retired shinobi who were in attendance, wearing a kimono instead of something more suited for combat. "He did no such thing," I calmly responded to the little upstart who barely made Takebetsu Jimin and seemingly helped himself to a few of Hiyashi's outfits. "Or are you saying he is a fool?" He blustered, tumbling over his own words, and then after he regained his composure firmly declared, "I'm not," in the direction of the Hokage. "What are you talking about?" He then asked with renewed vitriol. Only to decide it did not really matter and instead demanded, "Stop deflecting and answer the question." Sighing with members of his clan's customary troublesome, Nara Shikaku took over. What she meant was that only a fool would give an order knowing it wouldn't be followed, and as we are all clan leaders with, according to the Konoha Charter, full rights to rule our respective clans as we see fit. Therefore we are not required to justify our actions to the village or its governing body. Nor is the village allowed to interfere in clan matters in any way whatsoever. This means the Hokage may inquire about them, but she has every right to refuse to answer, and he most certainly can't force her to answer without violating the foundation this village was built upon, thereby setting a very dangerous precedent. More than one of the other clan leaders nodded along with his explanation. Following the prompt Hiashi gave him, one would only notice if you knew what you were looking for. He pressed further. Surely that's not the case, Take Tori Nezumi said, addressing the Hokage, who stayed silent. It was followed up by an angry, we have a right to know. Didn't you listen to a word Shikaku said? Itachi interjected. No, we don't. However, what the Hokage can ask and force an answer on is in regards to Uzumaki Naruto, the Nara clan leader clarified. Are you sure about that? I wondered aloud, and our eyes met. It took him just a moment to connect the dots, and another troublesome escaped his lips. Before stall any more of this waste of time, I withdrew a scroll from beneath my flak jacket and held it out for one of the two Anbu operatives who accompanied the Hokage into the room to take it. He scanned the scroll for a moment looking for any noticeable traps, and when he was satisfied handed it over to the Hokage. He opened the scroll and scanned its contents. When he was done he retrieved his pipe, which he lit up with a flick of his finger, and then leaned back into his seat, mulling over the information. Meanwhile, the room was eagerly waiting for him to disclose what he had learned. It was an intriguing way to remind the people assembled of his status as the Hokage, without outright proclaiming it, and it also allowed the flayed tempers of some to settle. He kept to himself for 3 deep drags of his pipe before he shared the contents of the scroll with the others. This document states that one Uchiha Mikoto is the godmother of one Uzumaki Naruto, and in case of the demise of his parents, she'll be named his guardian with all rights and duties that entails. Impossible, sounded through the hall. It has to be a forgery. I can assure you, the Hokage answered, this is no forgery. I can confirm the seals of both of Naruto's parents are genuine, as are the seals of the witnesses. It was a good thing I had insisted on witnesses back when we had signed it, knowing all too well that with just the two affected parties signing a contract that some might contest it if it served their own interests. Considering they were all politicians, most would contest it hoping to get a concession out of me. Who are those witnesses? Hiashi demanded to know. This time he actually voiced a question himself instead of using his patsy. Naruto's parents. It was curious the way he tried to avoid saying their names. Uchiha Mikoto. Tori Nezumi scoffed at that and mumbled. Of course she is. Jiraiya of the Sannin was the next name the Hokage read out, which shut any protest he had on his tongue down hard. Hatake Kakashi and Senjutsu Nade. It is true then? Itachi asked for confirmation. Indeed, it is, the Hokage answered. That's it. No more information, no nothing. For all we know, she has killed the boy or sold him to Kumo, Tori Nezumi accused me. Surely you have evidence to substantiate your insinuations. If not, I would strongly recommend not wasting any more of this body's time with your I paused for effect delusions. Specifically, if you are insinuating treason, the offended party might take offense. Are you threatening me? You tell me, I said. I turned my head and looked directly at him for the first time since entering the room, seeking his eyes. Do you feel threatened? Within moments he looked away, not having the stomach to hold my gaze. I was not even trying. His entire attitude was simply empty blustering from a man who hadn't been old enough to have fought in the last war. Enough, the Hokage's voice boomed through the room. You are Konoha shinobi. Act like it. After the Hokage's words, a silence settled upon the room. Chastised like children, most of those present nervously fidgeted in their seats. Some even evaded looking him in the eyes. The only occasional sound was the Hokage drabbing from his pipe, deeply in thought. Why now? If you don't mind me asking, Inoichi broke the silence. Why wait this long to claim Naruto? Contemplating whether I should answer, I admitted it was not by choice. What changed? He followed up on his original question. That was not too shabby. People always said Shikaku was the brain of Inoshikacho and underestimated the other two, who were not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. I am in charge of the Uchiha now. Why? There had been a minor difference of opinion on how the clan should be run. Since I happened to make the better arguments, determining the Uchiha clan's fate is now up to me. In my new capacity as head of the clan, I hereby officially notify the village of every change affecting it. A nod from the Hokage signaled me the go-ahead. I retrieved another scroll and handed it to one of the Anbu operatives. Those are the completely filed fatality reports of 542 members of my clan. I ask you to remove them from the active service roster. As a result of the drop in my clan's numbers, I also inform you that the Uchiha clan is longer able to perform its duties policing the village. Because of this, effective immediately, I dissolve the Uchiha police force and return any privileges that were granted to the Uchiha clan for that purpose. For the immediate future, I recommend Anbu take our place and for the village to consider options for a permanent replacement. At my proclamation, there were many shocked expressions. 542, dead Chmza Akamichi mumbled. That is unfortunate, was the extent of the Hokage's reaction. She killed them. Take Torinazumi cried out, jumping out of his seat. That is no simple misunderstanding. Seemingly surprised at the lack of people proclaiming their support for his condemnation, he looked around for someone he could sway. She murdered her own clan, her family. We can't just ignore that. That is exactly what we are going to do, the Hokage's stern voice said. But Take Torinazumi started anew. No, the Hokage firmly ordered. The Uchiha clan leader declared this as an internal clan matter. As Shikaku took it upon himself to remind us all, this means we will stay out of it. Or do you want me to look into practices of other clans which have resulted in fatalities over the years? Such as the Haikakage bird seal or the Kikage confusion of the Aburami. Because that is what you are asking for by violating the Konoha charter and setting a precedent. There isn't a single clan within Konoha that hasn't had accidents that lost Konoha shinobi, not one. Admittedly, a fatality number this high a number is unprecedented. Nevertheless, it is within the bounds of what is permitted. Having said that, I trust there won't be a repeat. Unlikely, I responded. Good, the Hokage said, pleased. If that is all. It is not, I interjected. Please excuse my interruption, Hokage-sama, I apologized, not only showing deference to the position he held, but also maintaining the proper courtesies the Uchiha Mikoto known to them was well known for. They would ascribe my rather curt and direct way from earlier littered with a short burst of hesitation and pauses to a mask I put on to make an impression. A too sudden shift in behavior would be detrimental to my plans, so the occasional instance of me falling back to old patterns would help sell my transformation from housewife to stern clan leader, as would be the adherence to protocol. But the combination of the reduction in our numbers and the vastness of the Uchiha compound makes it no longer a viable place for us to stay, I explained. Because of this, I decided to relocate the remaining members of my clan to the Uzumaki compound. Since this means there will be no one living in the Uchiha compound for the foreseeable future, I hereby allow the replacement of what was known as the Uchiha police force, unrestricted access to the premises, and request for them to patrol it. With some luck, the added incentive of unrestricted access to our clan compound might result in some clans vying to replace the Uchiha police force, hoping to find and claim some treasure that I might have left behind. Not that I had. I had made sure nothing of value was left. One of the advantages of being able to read someone's memories was that you got to see all their secrets, including hidden stashes. I considered the number of those lost to time negligible. For one, we shinobi knew about the risk of dying, so putting methods in place for pointing someone to your stash was simply common sense. Those who had not were either too stupid, which meant whatever they had hidden probably wasn't worth looking for either, or too smart or paranoid to write the location down, in which case, I doubted a simple search would be enough to locate it. Not that we Uchiha, in general, were prone to writing things down with our photographic memories. Besides, the information was the only thing I was concerned about to begin with. Let them keep all the money and weapons they could find. I could not possibly care less. Personally, I hoped the Haika would offer their services and allow themselves to be shackled down this way, but I doubted Hiashi would go for it. He wasn't nearly stupid enough, unlike Take Torinazumi, and if Hiashi had anything to say about it, he would not allow that either. Most would ascribe this decision to the difficulties of guarding the Uchiha compound henceforth would prove, given our reduced numbers, taking my words at face value. It had definitely played a part in my consideration, but the main reason for this decision was that I wanted Naruto to grow up where his parents had lived and in a way they would have wished for. The complex was filled with his family, all living under one roof and not spread among dozens of houses over a large area of space. A place of warmth, not cold. I see, the Hokage mused. Does this mean by claiming the guardianship of the child, she also gets control over the Uzumaki clan assets? Take Torinazumi asked out of nowhere. It does, Shikaku said, for better or worse. We can't allow that to happen. Take Torinazumi demanded. Sighing, the Hokage answered. What is it you suggest we do? Ignore the will of people this village holds in high esteem like no other and rob their child of his inheritance? How do you think that would go down with the shinobi population if we even entertained that notion? They would ask themselves what would stop us from doing the same to them when dying as war heroes and being the heir of a clan offered no protection. Shaking his head, he affirmed, no, we will do no such thing. Not just because of the law which is clear in this case, but because it is the right thing to do. Naruto's parents entrusted their most precious possession, their son, into the care of Mikoto-san. If they trusted her enough with that, who are we to argue with her about a few scrolls and some money? Hokage-sama, if I may, Hikahiyashi spoke up for the first time during this meeting. A nod signaled him to continue. It is not just a few scrolls we are talking about in this case. Namikaze-sama was a sitting Hokage. The village secrets that could be found among his belongings cannot just be ignored. It was interesting that he played that card. I wondered what he was after. I doubted it was some secret document as he claimed. A cursory glance revealed that more than one person was mulling over the implications of his words. A very good point, the Hokage conceded. It certainly cannot be ruled out that such documents might exist among the assets. I do have to wonder though, to whom of us such a suspicion could not be applied. I, in my long years on more than one occasion, have taken my work home. I'm sure most of you have done the same, which is the crux of the matter, is it not? The Hokage let those words sink in until even the last understood the implied threat his words posed. I hope with this we can finally lay this line of questioning to rest. It was deeply satisfying seeing those clan leaders having a tough time circumventing the laws their forefathers devised, with the explicit intention for them not to be circumvented at any cost. After scanning the faces of the people present, convincing himself that his words didn't fall on deaf ears, his eyes landed on me again. He raised an eyebrow in a questioning manner. "There's more," I declared. "The Uchiha clan no longer intends to send our children to attend the ninja academy. Recent events have shown that the combat strength of our members has greatly suffered at the hands of the instructors. In order to rectify that, from now on, they will receive their education from the clan until they are deemed sufficiently prepared to receive the provisional rank of genin, at which point we will send them to the academy to take part in the finals." No, the Hokage firmly disagreed. While not outright stated in the Konoha Charter that children have to attend the academy in order to become shinobi of the village, mostly to accommodate for exceptions, it is still expected of children living in the village to do so. In that case, consider this year's graduating class last one with an Uchiha graduate. "You can't be serious," Inoichi interjected. "I am," I affirmed. "This is my prerogative as a clan leader." "What about the Jinchuriki?" Teitori Nezumi asked. "Naruto, his name is Naruto," I emphasized. "If I deemed the academy unsuitable for members of my clan, what gave you the impression I would consider it anything else for Naruto? He has to. Eventually, when the shinobi to civilian ratio drops below 50% among the adult population, it would mean the loss of the status as a shinobi clan, resulting in forfeiture of their lands, among other things," Shikaku informed. I ignored their objections. As if I would care about such. Hokage, realizing I wouldn't budge, said, "How about a compromise?" I wasn't really interested in getting my clan members into the Konoha forces. On the one hand, it would mean they would be sent on a mission away from the clan. It would make them vulnerable. On the other hand, I couldn't give off the impression that I didn't care about the village. "I am listening." "In exchange for Naruto attending the academy, I will allow you to train the rest of your children as you see fit, and as long as they pass the final exam, allow them to join the Konoha shinobi forces. In perpetuity, including any future Uzumaki children," I added. As much as I would have liked to remove Naruto from the academy too, I knew that would never happen. Believing otherwise would merely have been wishful thinking on my part. Worse, I had every reason to believe the Hokage would go to war over this, so I took what I could get. I would make sure Naruto wouldn't suffer in the academy, neither in his progress nor emotionally. Kage Bunshin and Satsuki would make sure of that. For once, her existence seemed to be a boon. In perpetuity, the Hokage agreed. "I want that in writing." I had no interest in the village rescinding that offer the instant Naruto graduated. I also want assurances that Naruto will be on the same genin team as my second daughter, and for either a genin of my choosing or myself to lead that team. That is highly irregular, and it goes against the stated purpose of genin teams. Furthering inter-clan cooperation and team versatility. A purpose that could hardly be achieved if we allowed families to stay together. How else could they learn to accept their team and ultimately the whole village as their extended family? "Then it is a good thing I am not Naruto's parent," I interjected. Additionally, it is only uncommon for a parent and child to be on the same team, and this has happened on numerous occasions in the past, as Aburami-san can attest to. "Indeed," was his curt response. "Those were special circumstances," Teitori Nezumi objected. "DSS, special circumstances, don't make me laugh," Tsume scoffed. "I can't remember there was ever any issue whenever someone else wanted their pups on their teams. So why don't you man up and come out and say what you really mean, or shut the fuck up. I've got better things to do than listen to your rumblings and watching you embarrass yourself all day long. You don't like Mikoto-chan, we got it. But that is no basis to hassle her on. Every single issue. Frankly, I'm more than fed up with it and I'm sure I'm not the only one. There were some hesitant nods at her words. Language, Kageru chided sternly while a small smile played on the Hokage's lips. That is no behavior befit a woman of your standing, Tsume-san. I do not see a reason to deny Mikoto her request, the Hokage allowed. Neither is she Naruto's parent, nor would it be the first time we allow the mother and a daughter to be on the same team. And as long as the village is free to decide upon the last member of the team, it would still, albeit to a lesser degree, further inter-clan cooperation. Knowing this would be the best deal I would get, I voiced and agreed, and before he could respond, I pushed on. All remaining Uchiha clan members hereby request a leave of absence. Given the recent deaths, I think they badly need to stay with their family to mourn and come to terms with what happened. I placed another scroll on the desk in front of me containing the paperwork to that effect. Included was Izumi's withdrawal from Anbu. The risk of the village, especially Dan's, making one of my girls disappear was just too great. This was doubly true for Izumi, considering that most missions she would be sent on would be classified and, therefore, no follow-up investigations I could easily gain access to despite my newfound status as a clan leader. Given that she was one of the few left with a modicum of talent, I couldn't afford to waste her in that manner. The intel that she might gain by remaining part of Anbu didn't justify the risk. After what I had done, they would be very careful as to what intel she would get access to. In the end, it just meant I would have to rely on different methods to stay informed of what was going on in the shadows of the tree. Additionally, this would mean no revenue from clan members taking missions for some time. Since I fully intended to rent out the Uchiha compound, the financial strain of removing the members of my clan from active duty would not be at the expense of the Uchiha clan savings. Not that it would matter, as while we were nowhere near as rich as the Uzumaki, given Mito's genius business sense, it would still easily last us for decades. I am also correcting a long-existing oversight from the previous clan leader, who didn't see the necessity to safeguard our eyes. To that effect, seals designed by the late Uzumaki sealmister serving that purpose were applied to all our members, henceforth making it impossible to steal our bloodline no matter the means. Hopefully, this measure will make us more eligible for missions outside the village. I unnecessarily added a reason for this change in an attempt to make the gathered people believe that I considered this to be the reason for us being confined to the village. It was a layer diverting them from the true goal of disclosing this. Giving the assembled people a motive to go after Kakashi. All that was left was giving them a short reminder that there existed one Sharingan outside the Uchiha purview. Hokage-sama, since I see it as my responsibility to safeguard the Sharingan, could you please relate to Hatake-san that if he is willing, the seal can also be applied to his eye. I will endeavor to inform him, the Hokage said. While I said that, I paid close attention to the faces of everyone present. As expected, nobody's features gave anything away. Every single one of them was too well trained in schooling their features. It would have taken the Sharingan to perhaps make out something. Even though I was confident in my proficiency when it came to Genjutsu and therefore my ability to successfully mask my use of the Sharingan, it was ultimately not a risk I was willing to take surrounded by all those highly skilled shinobi on the hunch that there was more to the rumors surrounding my clan. This whole affair was already a balancing act and all the goodwill of those in the know for taking care of my treacherous clan members might evaporate into nothing by such a blatant breach of etiquette. I was the last who would blame them. The Sharingan was a dangerous weapon that could do more damage than any kunai with just a single glance. Because of the less than stellar decision-making of my predecessors, there will also be a change in status. The Uchiha clan has decided to become retainers of the Uzumaki clan. Several surprised outcries occurred at my proclamation. Admittedly, it was a significant step, but one I deemed necessary, regardless. Relying on some potentially existing goodwill wouldn't be enough. I needed to officially reassert our allegiance to the village in such a way that it was clear not only to those in the know about the planned coup that I did so, but also without broadcasting to the rest of the world that it was ever in doubt. This should dissuade everyone from the idea that the Uchiha clan would pursue anything similar under my leadership, because as a retainer to the Uzumaki, we simply wouldn't be in any position to do so unless ordered by Naruto. That was unlikely to happen, since the Hokage got his way with Naruto having to attend the academy to get him fully indoctrinated. Not that I had any plans of letting that happen, but they didn't need to know that. It should also help with clearing up our intentions regarding Naruto by placing him in a position of dominion over the Uchiha. Nobody would be able to plausibly accuse us of anything but having Naruto's best interest at heart. Anything to the contrary would simply be considered a stretch of the imagination. It also added another layer of protection to my boy, besides his Jinchuriki status, because without him, we, the Uchiha, would regain our freedom. I don't understand. Why would you want to give up your clan's self-determination and become subordinate to someone else? Tsume questioned. I was always close to the last Uzumaki scion within Konoha. Before her untimely death, we had planned to deepen that bond, I answered in part as a consideration for her earlier help. Puzzled over my words, she reiterated her argument. You've 2 daughters. There is nothing stopping you from implementing those plans. I didn't correct her misconception and instead reinforced it. The future of the Uchiha clan has always lied with Naruto. All I did with this step was make it official, I said, thus fueling the conclusion that Naruto was set to marry my heir, essentially giving him control of the clan either way. That no one questioned that by doing so I was robbing one of my daughters of her inheritance didn't seem to occur to anyone besides Tsume. I noticed her demeanor slightly shifting to a somber undertone with a hint of sympathy in her eyes. If the rumors about her daughter were to be believed, she was seen as unfit to succeed her, lacking the temperament necessary to establish her dominance over the rest of the pack. The rest took it in stride, but what else was there to expect of a woman whose father chose her husband over her to succeed him? It wouldn't surprise me if some thought that because of that, something had to be wrong with me. Assuming I was simply filling in for the clan leader position and that the bias of my upbringing was the reason I would imitate my father's actions while at the same time giving in to the romantically inclined mind of a woman and wanting to fulfill her dead friend's wishes. The Hokage's widened for just a fraction of a second before he clamped down on his reaction and schooled his features again. Unsurprisingly, he was the sole person not only aware of my exploits in Anbu and that I wasn't the meek woman people got to know me as, but also that there were only females left in my clan. He undoubtedly suspected the true meaning of my words. I see, the Hokage managed to press out. Preposterous, take Tori Nezumi shouted. You can't be okay with one of the 2 founding clans becoming the retainer of the broken remnants of a clan that has long lost any significance in the world. And you all are allowing it, he addressed everyone around only to refocus on me as he spat. You're not only shaming what your forefathers, your father created, but outright spitting on the village as an institution. How can you even entertain the notion of foisting one of your daughters who by all reports are geniuses onto the dead last of his whole year? If the Jinchuriki wouldn't have been a village asset, he'd have been expelled by now. He doesn't deserve either of them. I have to wonder who you think would be more deserving to marry my daughters, take Tori-san. Wholly ignoring my words as if I had never voiced them, he continued. Don't you see? She's just trying to create a voting bloc. If her goal as she claims was to get her and her friend's family closer together, she would dissolve the Uzumaki clan, a clan of 1, and merely adopt him into her clan. Please, as if such a thing doesn't already exist, Tsume chimed in, her gaze directed to where the Inoshikacho trio sat, only to return to him to mockingly add. You should know, I can't remember the last time you didn't vote the same as Hiashi. The lasting one, he added. Tsume just sneered at that. While I don't like where Tori seems to be going with starting to question when a clan should no longer be recognized as a proper clan, he brings up an interesting point. The Uzumaki clan has currently just 1 member. A male, which makes him eligible for the Clan Restoration Act. He's still a child for some years yet. It's far too early to discuss any of this. The sensible thing would be to let him enjoy his childhood. The reality of being a shinobi being an adult will crash down onto him early enough, Inoichi pointed out. Now is exactly the right time to discuss this matter, Shimura Dansum spoke for the first time. Wasn't it his own godmother who hinted at his marriage when she said a deepening of the bond between his and her clan was intended? It hadn't been easy to keep my expression blank simply being in the same room as him. The Mokuton user under his command he deliberately chose not to use was only partly responsible, and I couldn't care less about what I had learned from the memories of one of the Uchiha elders. It had been Dansum who had instigated their little coup by promising his root support. It had always struck me as odd that Fugaku and the elders had believed they could somehow succeed. Less than 600 of us, which included the elderly and children, against a village with more than 40 times that number in active duty shinobi. Anyone with a working brain should have realized it was a doomed undertaking right from the start. Not even Fugaku or the elders were out of touch enough with reality to believe otherwise. If, however, others were supporting it, and if they managed a decisive decapitation strike with a successor that many clans might have supported at hand, it actually might have worked. What those memories couldn't answer was the question if Dansum had always intended to double-cross the Uchiha, or if it was Shisui and Izumi coming forward that forced his hand, since he didn't want to end up right next to Fugaku on the chopping block. I wouldn't mind picking his brain to find out precisely what kind of traitor he was, specifically given some peculiar coincidences that pushed the Uchiha to consider this course of action, like the Kikbi attack followed by our ostracization and the passing of numerous laws that, if not outright aimed at the Uchiha, disadvantaged us the most. Laws that he and his faction had introduced and pushed through. For a moment, I was tempted to drag that elder to T&I if it wouldn't have soiled the Uchiha's public reputation even more and could have other repercussions. No, the far more important reason for my increasing irritation at hearing his emotionless voice drone on was that he dared to get involved in my Naruto's future. The urge to bury my hand deep within his intestines got harder to resist with every word from his mouth. "Which should suffice to put your concerns to rest, old friend," the Hokage intervened. "In fact, it does not," Danzm responded. "There was no mention of whom he is supposed to marry, when, or how many children we can expect. According to the Craw, 3 spouses are required with a minimum of 2 children each before he reaches his 20th birthday. And I think the continued existence of one of our premier clans is a reason for concern, for all of us. I don't remember you showing a similar concern when it came to the Hot Aki clan," Kaharu Utatane, the Hokage's late female teammate, said. "The Hot Aki clan is no premier clan of Konoha," he argued. "I don't think you will find many who would agree with that sentiment. Hot Aki Sakumo was one man who just so happened to carry the clan's name. It was Sakumo who instilled respect into our enemies." "You mean fear, right?" Inoichi joked. "Those are 2 different feelings that shouldn't be confused with each other." Ignoring his objection with a straight face, Danzm continued to say, "Quite unlike what a premier clan name can do. The second Hokage implemented this rule for a reason. And I bet, knowing that it would one day affect his grandniece, he would be the first wanting to abolish it," Tsume said. In response, Danzm glared at her. Unperturbed, she continued, "A law that has never been used." Sighing, the Hokage removed the pipe from his mouth. "I have no interest to rehash that old argument. So, for now, I say we follow Inoichi's suggestion and take up that topic at a later date. Since some tempers were roused, I think it would be best to adjourn this meeting and discuss the other non-pressing matters on another day to give each of you the chance to wind down. So, until we reconvene next week, dismissed." I stood up, but not without giving Tsume a nod of appreciation before I left, mindful of the fact that the prior exchange had not been my win, but Danzm's. While I was sure Tsume's reaction was genuine, I had every reason to believe she was played. The Hokage's words clued me in. This obviously wasn't the first time they had debated this, meaning her arguments and the Hokage's views should be well known. The fading interest of the other clan leaders when they had started had been another clear indication of that. Since a decision had been forestalled, not prevented, or cast in my Naruto's best interest, he had essentially tried to establish leverage by revealing that threat scenario. There was no doubt in my mind that he or one of his puppets would bring it up again in the future, and getting him to agree to sway the decision in my favor wouldn't be free. I had a feeling that I would not like what he would want in exchange. But he had made a mistake today. He had overplayed his hand and forewarned me. There was no way I would allow this to go down the way he imagined. I knew enough of his secrets to give me a good idea of where to start to dig to get some leverage in the form of irrefutable proof of my own. Chapter end. Alright, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Peace out.